Hello, my name is Chase Douglas and I'm the event coordinator here at Eco Canada. We're going to kick things off today with our webinar. Starting off, I just want to go over some housekeeping. So all participants are muted during the presentation. For technical issues, use the question box and select Eco Canada. The webinar will be sent out to everyone, a recording of it within 24 hours, and as well as any questions can be submitted through the chat question box function. Traditional land acknowledgement. Eco Canada and myself would like to recognize today and every day the land we are on. Eco Canada is committed to reconciliation, starts with acknowledging our honor and privilege to live and work within this Indigenous territory. Eco Canada acknowledges the traditional territories and oral practices of these Indigenous nations. So who is Eco Canada? Eco Canada is a steward of the Canadian environmental workforce across all industries. We champion end-to-end of career of an environmental professional. We not only train and certify professionals, but we also help identify and address labor market gaps. Our efforts to promote and drive responsible, sustainable economic growth to ensure that environmental care and best practices is a priority. So our presentation today will be hosted by Logan Holland and Matthew. So I'll hand things over to Matthew.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Hoping everyone can hear me. So I'm Matthew, I'm a program coordinator at Eco Canada, and I'm involved in several initiatives in the environmental sector. And thank you, Chase, for that introduction. So I'm going to be giving an overview of ZEVI, which is the overarching project that led to this webinar today. So ZEVI stands for Zero Emission Vehicle Awareness Initiative and is a project undertaken by ECO and funded by Natural Resources Canada. So the ZEVI project is designed to increase awareness and accelerate the adoption of zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicles, or MHDVs for short, across Canada. So we focus primarily on engaging with Indigenous, rural, and remote communities, as well as small businesses and transportation companies who would be pivotal in the shift towards sustainable transportation. Our approach includes educational webinars like the one today, hands-on workshops, in-person sessions, panel discussions, and many other formats where we delve into the benefits, challenges, myths, and practical considerations of transitioning to zero-emission vehicles. Our primary goal is not only to inform, but also to empower you by providing the tools and knowledge necessary to make informed decisions. We aim to foster a robust dialogue on how zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicles can be integrated effectively into their operations. It is crucial for us to address this, as the transportation sector is a significant contributor to national emissions, which is something that Logan will touch a bit more on later. So by focusing on MHDVs, we're targeting a space that has immense potential for impact. All right, so that's it for an intro for ZEVI, and thank you everyone for joining us and for your commitments to environmental sustainability and building a greener future. I'm going to hand you over now to Logan, who is going to lead the rest of the webinar. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. I'll just share my screen here quickly so everybody can see the presentation. So yeah, thanks for the introduction, Matthew and Chase. Hi, everybody. My name is Logan Hoyland, and I'm a project associate with Alberta Municipalities and the Municipal Climate Change Action Center. Happy to be here with you all this afternoon to talk about the future of medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicles here in Canada. Before we get started, I'll just quickly run through the agenda and kind of what we'll touch base on today. First, I'll do just a little introduction about the MCCAC and what we do, overview different zero emission vehicle types and their classification. We'll look at emissions related to the transportation sector and why it's important that we reduce emissions. And then the bulk of the presentation, we'll be looking at battery electric zero emission vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell zero emission vehicles. And then finally, we'll wrap up today's webinar with a look at the national goals, targets, and investments being made throughout Canada to accelerate adoption of medium duty and heavy duty zero emission vehicles. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Action Center, we were established in 2009 as a collaborative initiative between Alberta municipalities, the rural municipalities of Alberta, and the government of Alberta. And the Action Center provides funding, technical assistance, and education to Alberta municipalities and nonprofits in helping address climate change. On this slide here, you can see our impact over our 15 years, the number of participants, the amount of CO2 avoided, full-time jobs created, lifetime investment in energy savings technology, and solar installed through our different programs. So getting started, before we look at the emissions from the transportation sector and the different vehicle types, we'll look at vehicle categories specifically. So there's three categories. First are light duty vehicles. So light duty vehicles have a weight of less than roughly 10,000 pounds. And these are your everyday passenger vehicles, SUVs, cars, light trucks. And for this presentation, they'll be out of scope mainly. The next type are medium duty vehicles. These vehicles have a gross weight between roughly 10,000 pounds and 26,000 pounds. And these are mainly class 4, 5, and 6 vehicles. Common examples here would be utility vans, like Amazon delivery vans, small dump trucks or box trucks. And then finally, the third type of vehicle are heavy duty. Heavy duty vehicles have a gross weight greater than roughly 26,000 pounds and are class 7 and 8 vehicles. Examples here would be dump trucks, city buses, semi-tractor trailer units, sleeper trucks, things like that. And for this presentation, we're mainly going to be focusing on medium and heavy duty vehicles. Also important to define the terms and acronyms we'll be using throughout the presentation. A lot of these terms are interchangeable, so it's just important to define what exactly we'll be looking at and talking about. So zero emission vehicles, or ZEVs, are vehicle type that do not directly produce any carbon-based emissions during operation. And for this presentation, we'll be looking at two types. So the first are fully battery electric vehicles, or BEVs, or EVs. EVs are charged and electricity is stored within a battery. That electricity then moves the vehicle by going through an electric motor. And these are more common as light duty vehicles. So there's lots of current light duty electric vehicles like a Ford Lightning, like a Tesla, like a Chevy Blazer. The other type of zero emission vehicle we'll look at are hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. These are often referred to as fuel cell vehicles or just hydrogen vehicles. And hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are powered by hydrogen, which is stored in a tank. That hydrogen is then fed through a fuel cell, which reacts with oxygen to produce electricity. And we'll touch on that a little bit more later on in the presentation, specifically how that works. And then that electricity goes to an electric motor, which ultimately moves the vehicle. And today, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are a lot less common than fully electric vehicles. There are other types of hydrogen vehicles, one being a blended hydrogen vehicle, where hydrogen is blended into gasoline or diesel, and then it is used within a modified combustion engine. And the other type are direct combustion hydrogen vehicles, where it's just the gaseous hydrogen that is combusted in an engine. However, those two types of hydrogen vehicles will be out of scope for this specific presentation. Before we look at the emissions related to the transportation sector, it's important to provide some context and perspective regarding the number of medium duty, heavy duty, and buses that are registered throughout Canada. So as of 2022, there were roughly 675,000 medium duty vehicles, around 610 heavy duty vehicles, and 67,000 buses. So roughly 1.3 million in total. Again, that was 2022. However, the numbers for 2024 are probably quite similar. A couple things to keep in mind when looking at this table. Specific vehicle data for drivetrain type was unfortunately only available for medium duty vehicles. So we can see here in 2022, there were roughly 37 fully electric medium duty vehicles, and then 75 listed under other. Hydrogen is lumped into that other category. However, so is natural gas and propane. So the number of hydrogen vehicles in that 75 is likely quite low. Looking at heavy duty vehicles, again, probably quite comparable to medium duty vehicles. Very few fully electric or hydrogen fuel cell heavy duty vehicles currently on the market or being driven throughout Canada. And then finally, looking at buses there, you can see that there are roughly 600 fully electric buses registered throughout Canada. This number is significantly higher than both the heavy duty and medium duty battery electric sections, which is significant and something we'll come back to a little bit later on in the presentation. I think for the next slide here, we just have a quick poll that I will let Chase put up and give everybody a minute or two or a minute to answer that, and then we'll jump on to the next slide. Looks like a couple answers are still filing in here. I'll give it about 10 more seconds and then we'll jump over to the next slide. Awesome. So I think most people have completed it, and it looks like most people got it right actually, with the percentage of greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector directly related to heavy duty vehicles. That was 24%. So just about half of everybody got that one right. So yeah, this pie chart here illustrates the sources of greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector from 2015 through 2019. There were roughly 828 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent produced from the transportation sector in those 4 years. And in those 4 years, just over half of the transportation emissions came from light duty passenger vehicles, so cars and trucks. And then that was followed by heavy duty trucks at 24%, or 196 megatons. And then finally, freight, rail, and aviation and marine made up the remaining 23% or so. So the largest opportunity currently to reduce emissions in the transportation sector comes from passenger vehicles, which is something we're already doing in Canada. With the new sales mandate, 100% of new passenger vehicles sales will need to be zero emission by 2035. And then the next largest opportunity to reduce emissions comes from the heavy duty vehicle sector, which again produces right around 24-25% of all emissions in the transportation sector. Delving a bit deeper into those numbers, again, the transportation sector is the second largest source of emissions in Canada, accounting for 22%. And the emissions from the transportation sector has grown by about 33% since 1990. And growth in emissions has mostly been driven by heavy duty vehicles and light duty trucks, with emissions coming from heavy duty vehicles, which has doubled actually since 1990. So yeah, now that we have just kind of a good overview of the emissions profile and why reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the medium duty and heavy duty sector is important, we can look at the two vehicle types that we can use to help reduce them. So the first type of zero emission vehicle we'll look at are fully electric or EV medium duty and heavy duty vehicles. So medium duty and heavy duty vehicles essentially use the same technology that is used within light duty electric vehicles, like a Ford Lightning or a Tesla, just at a much larger scale. Medium duty vehicles and especially heavy duty vehicles just need longer driving ranges and therefore bigger batteries and more time to charge. And electrifying heavy duty vehicles that travel long distance, like semi units, are even a greater challenge compared to medium duty vehicles because of their driving duty cycle. On this slide here in this table, we can see the average driving ranges and battery sizes for medium and heavy duty vehicles based on class. It's important to remember that these are averages, and some of the EVs are going to have ranges that are lower than the average, and others are going to be significantly higher, as we'll see in a later slide. A couple things to note when you're looking at the average driving range and battery size. As you go up in class, aside from class 5, you can see that the driving range increases, as does the battery size. As often as the vehicle weight increases, you need a larger battery to try to accommodate and get a larger or longer driving range. When you look at the overall landscape of medium duty and heavy duty electric vehicles, medium duty and buses currently present the greatest opportunity for electrification, as many medium duty vehicles like delivery vans and buses have very predictable driving patterns and often return to either a depot or a garage overnight. It makes it easier to design the necessary charging infrastructure and scheduling. If you're returning to a depot overnight and they're able to charge the vehicle, over an 8-hour period, it's much easier to utilize existing electrical infrastructure or even possibly use level 2 charging, which makes designing for charging quite a bit easier and not near as costly as using DC level 3 fast charging. What is quite a bit more difficult is designing for the heavy duty vehicles. Because heavy duty vehicles like semis use a lot of energy, they need to recharge quickly in order to avoid costly downtimes. The duty cycle of many heavy duty vehicles like semis is to transport freight and to be on the road as much as possible and to try to eliminate as much downtime as possible. And often right now, it isn't feasible for heavy duty trucks to stop and charge for 30 minutes, an hour, or 2 hours a few times a day. And this is where having large scale DC fast charging is quite important. Fast chargers up to a megawatt in size can reduce the time needed to stop and charge by quite a bit. Of course, right now in Canada, the charging network is still quite limited, especially for heavy duty trucks. We are seeing an accelerated rollout of more and more DC fast chargers that are practical for light duty vehicles or passenger vehicles. But right now, the necessary infrastructure for heavy duty vehicles is quite limited, and only now are companies like Siemens starting testing and production on fast chargers that are up to a megawatt in speed. This slide in this table just kind of provides some perspective, and we can look at some roughly calculated charging speeds and rates. Of course, charging speed and the amount of energy that is delivered to a vehicle will vary depending on the charger type, the vehicle, the battery size, what percentage of battery you arrive with, and the weather conditions. But this table just kind of provides some perspective of the amount of energy and the amount of percentage that can be recouped. So for this table, we're assuming that there is a 500 kilowatt hour battery pack in the vehicle, and it's stopping to charge for 30 minutes. So you can see there are 4 chargers included, starting at 100 kilowatts, 200 kilowatts, 350 kilowatts, and then up to 100 kilowatts or 1 megawatt. And you can see over 30 minutes, the amount of battery percentage that is recouped in that amount of time. So at the 100 kilowatt station with a 500 kilowatt battery, only about 8% of that battery is recouped, which isn't much at all, compared to if you look at the 1 megawatt charger, in 30 minutes, you could recoup up to 80% of that vehicle's battery capacity, or quite a bit of a range. So the application, currently the 100 kilowatt, 200, and especially the 350 kilowatt are all practical for light duty, medium duty, and then some heavy duty vehicles. But when looking at tractor trailer units specifically, having higher charge rates are really important to reduce downtime and charging stoppage. Something a little bit different here. So SAE J3271 is a standard that's being developed by the Society of Automotive Engineers. And essentially, the purpose of the standard is to ensure compatibility and reliability in charging for all heavy-duty EV trucks. What we don't want to have happen is that every heavy-duty truck manufacturer develops a truck or a charging plug that's only used by that truck. What we want to have happen is a unified plug used across the industry, so people know that every plug they can use in their vehicle and is going to improve reliability and confidence in the charging network. Just a quick example of a fully electric heavy-duty truck. So this is the Tesla Semi. They're currently in operation in the States. I believe Pepsi is currently running some of them. It has a range of 800 kilometers fully loaded, 1,000 kilowatt hour battery pack, and can recoup up to 70% of its battery capacity in 30 minutes when you use a Tesla fast charger. This is just one example of a fully electric heavy-duty EV. In the second webinar, we'll look in detail a little bit more at some different case and use studies. So at a high level, fully electric, medium-duty, and heavy-duty EVs have both several advantages and disadvantages. Looking at the advantages, they don't produce any greenhouse gas emissions during operation. And when you account for all the emissions produced from the manufacturing and production phase, EVs still produce less greenhouse gas emissions over their entire lifespan compared to an internal combustion engine vehicle. Also, heavy-duty or medium-duty EVs have fewer moving parts and a greater efficiency. For internal combustion engine vehicles, they typically have an efficiency of around 20 to 25%, meaning if you put a full tank of gasoline or diesel in, only around 25% of that gasoline or diesel is actually being used to turn the wheels. The rest is often dissipated as heat, compared to electric vehicles, which have an efficiency of anywhere from 80 to 90%, whereas up to 90% of the electricity that you put into the battery is actually being used to move the vehicle. EVs also have lower operating costs, and regenerative braking helps improve performance and recoup some of that lost range. However, there still are lots of disadvantages for fully electric vehicles, especially looking at heavy-duty EVs. They still have very limited range compared to internal combustion engine heavy-duty and medium-duty trucks. They still have quite slow charging speeds, specifically for heavy-duty EVs. They're still more expensive than comparable internal combustion engine vehicles, and the batteries do degrade around 1 to 2%, depending on the specific vehicle. So shifting gears a bit, now we'll look at hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So hydrogen fuel cell vehicles utilize hydrogen, oxygen, and a fuel cell to produce electricity. We'll look at this a little bit more on the next slide. But essentially, hydrogen is stored on board as the fuel source. It then passes through the fuel cell, which produces electricity, and then that electricity is used to move the vehicle. Hydrogen fuel cell vehicles have advanced tremendously in the past handful of years. However, they are still a much less developed technology compared to fully electric vehicles and have their own set of unique opportunities and challenges. So briefly looking at how a hydrogen fuel cell is designed and how it works. Essentially, hydrogen is passed through the anode, which splits the hydrogen molecule into an electron and a positive atom. That atom then passes through the membrane in the middle, while the electron flows through a circuit, which is used to power the electric motor and move the vehicle. Then that hydrogen atom, the electron, both combine with oxygen at the cathode to form water as the byproduct. This is a really simplified explanation of how a fuel cell works. If you are interested in learning more, I recommend just going on YouTube. There's dozens of great videos that really illustrate how fuel cells work and how they're combined together to create enough electricity to actually move a vehicle. So looking at hydrogen production and intensity. So there are three main ways that hydrogen is currently produced, and each has an associated color. So the first type of hydrogen is gray hydrogen, and gray hydrogen is produced using steam methane reforming. So essentially, high temperature steam is used to separate hydrogen from methane. That hydrogen is then captured and stored while the carbon escapes or is vetted off to the atmosphere. And this form of hydrogen production has a very high environmental impact, with around 30 grams of CO2 equivalent being produced for every 1 megajoule of energy. And this is how almost all hydrogen is produced in Alberta today. The second type of hydrogen is blue hydrogen. So again, this is produced using the same way, steam methane reforming. However, the biggest difference here with blue hydrogen is that carbon that is created as a byproduct is captured and sequestered, which reduces the environmental impact of blue hydrogen by quite a bit. The third type is green hydrogen. So green hydrogen is produced using electrolysis. So renewable energy, ideally, is passed through water, and then this separates the oxygen from the hydrogen molecules. Again, the hydrogen are captured and stored. And if 100% renewable electricity is used during electrolysis, there would not be any direct emissions related to this process. However, if you were to complete electrolysis here in Alberta, where still the majority of our electricity comes from natural gas, it would have a significant environmental impact compared to if electrolysis was completed in Quebec, where quite a bit of their electricity comes from hydropower, which would reduce the greenhouse gas intensity of green hydrogen by quite a bit. Here on this slide, we can just kind of see the different intensities of the different hydrogen production methods. Gasoline, diesel, and gray hydrogen all have very comparable carbon intensities per megajoule, while blue hydrogen is significantly less. And then in this example, green is 0. Again, if non-renewable electricity was used to electrolyze that water, then green hydrogen would have a greater carbon intensity. So really dependent on the electricity used and where that green hydrogen is created. So delving into the properties of hydrogen a bit more. So hydrogen is the most abundant element on Earth, and it's also the lightest, which presents a whole host of opportunities and challenges. On a mass basis, hydrogen has nearly 3 times the energy content of gasoline. But if you look on a volume basis, hydrogen has very poor energy content. So if you think of a 1 liter bottle of pop, if you had 1 liter of hydrogen, there would be roughly 8 megajoules of energy within. Whereas if you had a 1 liter bottle of gasoline, there would be 32 megajoules. So 3 times as much energy in that same volume. And this property of low energy content per volume is what makes effectively transporting and storing hydrogen quite difficult. Right now, there are 2 main ways that hydrogen is stored, transported, and then ultimately used within vehicles. The first way is to compress hydrogen. So compressing hydrogen within a tank increases the amount of energy that is stored within. Hydrogen is typically pressurized to either 350 bar or 700 bar, which is around 1,000 psi. And then it must be maintained at this pressure within the storage tank so it doesn't leak over time. Typically, heavy-duty trucks refuel using the 700 bar of pressure. The second way that you can store hydrogen is to cool it to negative 253 degrees Celsius, so it becomes a liquid. Once in liquid form, it must be maintained at negative 253 so it doesn't leak over time or doesn't evaporate. And maintaining this temperature does require quite a bit of electricity and energy. However, if hydrogen can be maintained as a liquid, it's much easier to transport compared to gaseous hydrogen. Right now, there are very few hydrogen fuel cell vehicles that actually store hydrogen on board as a liquid. Most hydrogen fuel cell vehicles use gaseous hydrogen or store it as gaseous. And because it's quite difficult to transport and store hydrogen, this again leads to a whole host of challenges when designing refueling stations. Because hydrogen either needs to be highly pressurized or cooled, it's more likely that we'll see centralized refueling stations, especially for heavy-duty trucks or semis, rather than retrofitting current gas stations that are throughout cities, because they don't have the capability, the land size, or the current infrastructure to effectively store hydrogen at that pressure and at those temperatures. Again, in the next webinar, we'll look at a little bit more of the challenges and opportunities around storing hydrogen. This slide and this picture is just a really great illustration that shows how hydrogen refueling stations work and how they deliver hydrogen to vehicles. So going left to right, we can see that hydrogen can be delivered as a gas from either a truck or a pipeline. It can be produced on site using steam methane reforming or electrolysis, or it can be delivered in liquid form. The gaseous hydrogen is then compressed to the required temperature, or the liquid hydrogen is maintained at that cold temperature to make sure it stays a liquid. And then when a vehicle comes to refuel, it's either vaporized if it's currently a liquid, or if it's a gas, it's repressurized to the correct temperature and then dispersed into the vehicle. And then on the right side, you can see the estimated refueling times for different vehicle types. And that's one of the biggest advantages of hydrogen. If you look at the semi, it has a refueling time of around 20 minutes, which is very comparable to refueling either a gasoline or diesel powered vehicle, both significantly quicker, the refueling times for hydrogen is significantly quicker than the time needed to charge an electric vehicle, a heavy duty or medium duty vehicle. Here's just one example of a hydrogen fuel cell truck. This is the Nikola TRE. It has a range of about 800 kilometers, a 20-minute refueling time, a 70 kilogram storage tank that's pressurized to 700 bar, and a 164 kilowatt hour battery pack that stores electricity that is produced from regen braking. Another example here of a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, a Hyundai Exient. This truck has a 400 kilometer range, 31 kilogram storage tank, pressurized to 350 bar with a 72 kilowatt hour battery pack. Again, these are just two quick examples, and the next webinar we'll look at some more case studies specifically. So wrapping up our look at hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, there are both advantages and disadvantages to the vehicle type. Hydrogen fuel cell vehicles don't produce any emissions during operation, and if blue or green hydrogen is used, their environmental impact can be quite low. They do have comparable ranges to combustion engine vehicles, and likely their greatest advantage, especially for heavy duty trucks, is that they have very comparable refueling times, in that 15 to 20 minute time range compared to EVs, which is quite a bit slower. However, there are still several disadvantages. Like we talked about, it's still very difficult to store and transport hydrogen effectively due to its low energy content by volume. If gray carbon is used within vehicles, the environmental impact is still quite comparable to internal combustion engine vehicles. And likely still the greatest challenge to hydrogen fuel cell vehicles right now is the limited number of refueling stations throughout Canada. So right now there are only 6 refueling stations in the whole country. 5 are in BC and 1 is in Quebec. There are several stations that are being developed. A new station was actually just announced here in Alberta at the Blackjack Roadhouse. There's still more that will be introduced over time, but again, still quite low, even compared to electric vehicle charging stations. We are beginning to see quite a few more DC fast chargers for light duty vehicles, and over time, again, we'll see more and more for the heavy and medium duty vehicles as well. I think now Chase has a quick poll he will put up again. So again, I'll give everybody just 30 seconds or so to answer this question, and then we'll finish up with incentives. And yeah. So for strategies, there's still a couple answers coming in here, but it looks like the majority of participants are answering with expanding and improving charging and refueling infrastructure as the most critical for accelerating the adoption of medium duty and heavy duty vehicles here in the province. So finally, the last thing we'll touch base on is just quickly sales regulations and incentives. So right now, there is no sales regulation for medium duty or heavy duty zero emission vehicles in Canada. According to Canada's 2030 emission reduction plan, there is a target that 35% of all new medium and heavy duty vehicles will need to be zero emission by 2030. But again, not a mandate. The government is currently working on developing regulations that 100% of new medium duty and heavy duty vehicles will need to be zero emission by 2040, based on feasibility and vehicle class type. Meaning it's more likely that medium duty vehicles and buses will be regulated or mandated before the heavy duty vehicles like semis are mandated. And as more zero emission vehicles come to market and as more refueling and charging stations expand, we'll likely see more and more adoption of those vehicle types. The government's also offering incentive programs for businesses and organizations to purchase zero emission, medium duty, and heavy duty vehicles. This is the MHD ZEV program, not a great acronym. This incentive program essentially applies an incentive to the vehicle purchase when you buy it from a dealership. There are a list of around 500 vehicles that are listed on Transport Canada's website. Of those 500 vehicles, only I believe 3 of them are hydrogen fuel cell, with all 3 of them being Class 8 semis. The rest are either fully electric or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And through this program, applicants can receive up to $1 million or 10 projects or complete 10 projects per year. Vehicles can either be purchased or leased, and the incentive varies dependent on vehicle type and class. This slide just illustrates the incentive an applicant could receive based on class type. So starting at $10,000 all the way up to a maximum of $200,000 for class 7 or 8 vehicles. Again, if you are interested, I recommend just Googling MHZEV. They have a good page that breaks down how the program works, eligibility, and just general frequently asked questions. And that brings us to the end of this webinar. In webinar 2, my colleague Kelvin will be exploring in detail some more zero emission vehicle case studies and use studies, a little bit more of a look at the challenges and opportunities, and kind of a future outlook of the transportation industry here in Canada and some possible outcomes. So thanks everybody for attending. I think now we'll open up the Q&A for questions, where Chase will be going through that. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in there. And if you aren't able to, or have any questions that come up later, please feel free to reach out to myself. I'm happy to help. Thanks everybody.
Awesome, thanks Logan. First question here is, do we have 1MW chargers currently existing?
It's a good question. No, we don't, not for use. I believe it was actually just in the past 6 months that Siemens just completed their first model of a 1 megawatt charger and have begun testing it. But no, none are currently available for commercial use.
Thanks for that. Next question. Regarding 2022 MD/HD vehicle registrations, while I recognize the data from StatsCan, the other category, which includes natural gas, have registrations that seem incredibly low, particularly when considering CNG fleet of garbage trucks that both WM and GFL have in Canada. What might be the reason for this?
It's a good question. I don't know entirely. The data unfortunately wasn't available for heavy duty vehicles. So if dump trucks, for example, were categorized by Stats Canada as a heavy duty vehicle, then it wasn't included in that data. But of, I think it was 75 under the other category, the majority would be natural gas or propane.
Awesome. Next question here. Can MHD ZEVs refuel at the same charging stations as light vehicles?
It's a good question. So for medium duty vehicles, the answer is probably yes. Typically they use the same plug type. We're kind of going through a transition here in Canada actually, for the plug type that's used. For the past handful of years, all or the majority of light duty vehicles used a CCS connector, but just last summer, Ford, Hyundai, I believe, and GM have all adapted the Tesla fast charger. So I imagine most of the medium duty vehicles will be using that plug type. And then for the heavy duty vehicles, I think I mentioned that standard that they're trying to unify across heavy duty vehicles. It will likely be something different, because heavy duty vehicles will be using up to a megawatt of charging. The plug needed will be quite a bit bigger. It'll need to be cooled a lot more. So likely going to be different for those class 7 and 8 vehicles.
Awesome. Thanks. Next question. Are there insurance incentives fleets switching for commercial ZEV?
Insurance. I am not aware of any incentives. I have heard actually for light duty vehicles of insurance costs going down when you purchase an electric vehicle, because EVs like Teslas have so many cameras, it could actually reduce your insurance costs. But for heavy duty and medium duty vehicles, I don't know.
Why are plug-in hybrid electric vehicles considered ZEVs when they still have a combustion engine?
Another good question. So Stats Canada and the incentive program does consider plug-in hybrids a type of zero emission vehicle. You're correct that they are not fully emission free because you still have a gasoline or diesel powered motor within that vehicle. I believe the incentives you could receive through that program for plug-in hybrids are a little bit less than a fully electric or a fully fuel cell vehicle.
And then last question I have here is, what about agricultural hydrogen vehicles? Are there incentives to develop and practicality of refueling and figuring out the feasible of agriculture? Is there agricultural vehicles a standard class or dealt with differently?
That's a great question. To be honest, I don't know. This incentive program does not include agricultural vehicles. I know there are some manufacturers that are working towards building hydrogen or even electric agricultural equipment. I would lean towards it likely being more likely that agricultural vehicles would kind of go the hydrogen route because of their use case and the limitations that batteries have. But as of right now, no, there are no incentives for agricultural vehicles.
And then one more just popped up, and then I think we're good to go, is what are the criteria or methods used for emissions measurements?
I don't know entirely. I know everything, so it looks at different emissions, so methane and other NOx, and then converts those into carbon dioxide equivalent. Based upon the intensity of the fuel that is in those vehicles, and then estimating how often they're used, they can establish a baseline of the emissions that are produced from light duty, heavy duty, aviation, those types of vehicle categories.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, Logan. If anyone has any more questions about anything, you can obviously reach out to Logan there, but as well as events@eco.ca, you can reach out to us for a recording of this. It should be sent to you in 24 hours, but if you do not receive it, please reach out, as well as check out our website for all of our upcoming webinars and events. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Logan.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Thanks, Matthew. Bye.
Thank you.